Welcome to History Files. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning to the news you've always dreaded. The conflicts already shaking our world have suddenly crossed a line that cannot be easily reversed. Right now, Russia and Ukraine are still at war. The Middle East remains on a knife edge, and tensions in other strategic hotspots are just simmering. Now, none of these real-world conflicts automatically guarantee a third world war. But imagine something different for a moment. Imagine a hypothetical scenario where these isolated conflicts suddenly chain together. In this completely hypothetical scenario, let's say a NATO member is attacked. American forces come under sustained assault. Russia responds to direct Western involvement, and China enters a rapidly escalating crisis in the Pacific. We've officially crossed the point of no return. Within hours, literally the first 24 hours, regional wars would start transforming into a direct confrontation between the world's most powerful military alliances. We're exploring this today not because anyone can predict the future, but because understanding what could happen is absolutely crucial to understanding what our world has to lose. So, what does this all mean for those crucial first 24 hours? Well, it wouldn't look like a Hollywood blockbuster. Instead of dramatic speeches, you'd have frantic warnings, emergency meetings, and just profound, absolute confusion. The most terrifying first question governments have to answer is, was this attack deliberate? Was it a rogue missile strike, a massive cyber attack, a military accident, or maybe a false flag meant to look like a much larger attack? In our nuclear age, that uncertainty itself is incredibly dangerous. Political leaders would be facing an impossible choice: respond immediately or risk making the situation infinitely worse. One of the most immediate dominoes to fall in these early hours would be the activation of alliances. Take NATO's Article 5. It establishes the core principle of collective defense. An attack on one is an attack on all. Now, it's really important to understand that this doesn't mean every member automatically declares war in exactly the same way. Each nation determines its own necessary assistance. But in a massive global crisis, the political pressure to respond with force would be absolutely enormous. The second these powerful alliances awake and mobilize, the possibility of a deadly miscalculation skyrockets. You see, escalation rarely happens with one single, world-ending push of a button. It's more like a dangerous chain reaction. Step 1 is usually a misinterpretation of a military movement. Then comes Step 2, a defensive deployment that the other side completely views as an offensive threat. That leads to Step 3, an escalatory response. And finally, Step 4, an uncontrollable chain reaction that spirals right out of everyone's hands. One misunderstanding triggers a response, and that response triggers another. It spreads like wildfire. While that's happening, the Middle East could quickly become one of the most dangerous theaters of the conflict. A wider confrontation pulling in Iran, Israel, and the United States would inevitably drag in additional actors. Lebanon could face total instability, and the Red Sea would become highly dangerous for any commercial shipping. But there's a bigger reason the entire globe would be holding its breath: oil and the Strait of Hormuz. Even a minor disruption in this narrow waterway turns a regional fight into everybody's problem. We're talking immediate shocks to global energy supplies, crippled shipping lanes, and skyrocketing prices across the planet. But keep in mind, this war wouldn't just be fought on land, at sea, or in the air. Some of the absolute most critical battles would happen on an invisible battlefield: cyberspace. Imagine waking up to find your bank systems completely down, airports totally paralyzed, and power grids failing. In cyberspace, fear can travel way faster than any weapon. Information itself becomes a weapon of mass disruption. False reports, fabricated military announcements, and terrifying rumors about nuclear attacks would spread panic globally in a matter of minutes. If we trace the timeline of this hypothetical conflict out to the first week, you can see how rapidly society shifts. Day 1 is just pure shock. Day 2 brings massive military mobilization. By day 3, governments are forced to prepare their civilian populations for a prolonged, brutal crisis. And by day 7, the global economy is completely transformed. Oil prices surge, airlines cancel all international routes, and countries aggressively hoard strategic supplies. It's the moment ordinary people realize that the enormous international supply chains holding our modern world together are quite literally breaking apart. If you're fascinated by uncovering the hidden forces shaping our world, take a quick second to subscribe to History Files. Because here, we don't just look at what happened, we dive deep into why it happened and what it could actually mean for our future. Month 1, the war economy. If the world survived that first month, the entire nature of the conflict would shift. The initial shock wears off, and the grim reality of adaptation sets in. We enter the war economy phase. Factories pivot overnight to wartime production, and governments redirect trillions towards defense. And that line between combatant and non-combatant, it gets incredibly blurry. Countries that tried to stay neutral would face immense, crushing pressure to pick a side, whether that's providing weapons, intelligence, or funding. By this point, we'd be looking at multiple massive fronts. Over in the European theater, a direct confrontation between Russia and NATO drastically increases the danger of escalation, making air defense systems and civilian logistics absolutely critical for survival. Meanwhile, the Pacific theater presents a whole different, complex calculus. Would China enter the fray? Well, that depends on a lot of factors, but a conflict there means divided U.S. resources and a devastating shock to global shipping. Remember, the Pacific carries a huge portion of the world's trade. That means electronics, automobiles, and manufacturing would grind to a halt globally. The nuclear question, crossing the threshold. This is where we reach the question literally nobody wants to answer. It's the darkest aspect of any global conflict scenario. If nuclear-armed states were directly fighting a major conventional war, the absolute top priority of every single government would be preventing escalation across the nuclear threshold. Because once that line is crossed, there is no going back. The consequences become completely impossible to control. 12,187. According to SIPRI's 2026 assessment, that is the total estimated number of nuclear warheads currently possessed by the world's nuclear-armed states. Now, we're not presenting this staggering number to predict a nuclear war, but as a very somber reminder of the sheer scale of the danger. It represents a level of destruction that goes far beyond any previous war in human history. To put it in perspective, it's an almost incomprehensible amount of firepower. Narrowing that focus down a bit, roughly 2,100 to 2,200 of these deployed warheads are estimated to be kept on high operational alert at all times. If even a single nuclear detonation occurred over a populated area, the blast, the heat, and the radiation effects would be apocalyptic. Medical systems would be instantly and totally overwhelmed. Transportation and communications would just cease to exist. This is the exact moment where a conventional World War III scenario transforms into something fundamentally different and utterly devastating for humanity. If this explainer is helping you see today's geopolitical landscape a bit differently, please take a moment to like and share it with someone who wants to understand the immense forces shaping our future. Because understanding the world isn't really about predicting tomorrow. It's about recognizing the profound choices we make today that will shape it. Now, I want you to imagine something perhaps even more difficult to grasp. The war has lasted 1 full year, and somehow, miraculously, the world has avoided a full-scale nuclear exchange. Yet the planet has fundamentally altered. By month 3, global trade has completely reorganized around competing blocks. By month 6, we'd see massive demographic shifts as millions upon millions of people are displaced. By month 9, trade routes and manufacturing hubs have completely relocated. And by month 12, you have entire generations growing up knowing wartime conditions as just normal life. But, perhaps the greatest humanitarian consequences would actually appear far, far away from the front lines. This is what we call the hidden geography of global war. Developing economies, which are highly dependent on imported fuel, food, and fertilizer, would be incredibly vulnerable. Exploding shipping costs and extreme fertilizer shortages would lead directly to skyrocketing food prices. So a geopolitical crisis in one hemisphere creates devastating humanitarian emergencies in poorer countries thousands of miles away, countries that had absolutely nothing to do with starting the conflict in the first place. This is the reality of World War III that often gets lost in those dramatic geopolitical debates: the ordinary people. A global war isn't just a chess match played by presidents, generals, and military alliances. It's the person waiting in a miles-long line for fuel. It's separated families. It's overwhelmed doctors working around the clock without basic medical supplies. And it's displaced refugees carrying literally everything they own on their backs. History tends to remember wars through lines on a map, but ordinary people experience war through profound uncertainty, severe shortages, and devastating personal loss. Which brings us to a really pivotal question. The most important question about World War III might not actually be who would win, but rather, could humanity prevent the war from reaching its worst possible outcome? History isn't just controlled by weapons and automated systems. Every single crisis reaches a critical threshold where leaders still have choices. Even after an enormous escalation, there were always off-ramps. Leaders can choose step 1, just pause. They can initiate step 2, back-channel diplomacy. They can move to step 3, negotiating ceasefires and facilitating prisoner exchanges to build a tiny bit of trust. And ultimately, step 4, they can step back. Political leaders always retain the ability to decide that continuing a deadly conflict is vastly more dangerous than finding a way to end it. And that brings us to the core truth of our era. War is not inevitable simply because tensions exist, and peace is certainly not guaranteed just because people want it. Between those two extremes stand human decisions. Our world has already endured 2 world wars, and the nuclear age has added stakes that are completely unprecedented. If a global conflict began tomorrow, the ultimate question is whether humanity could find the courage to stop the chain reaction before it becomes irreversible. If you want more cinematic documentaries exploring the mysteries, conflicts, and turning points that shaped our world, make sure to subscribe to History Files. The greatest lesson of history isn't just understanding how wars begin, but understanding exactly how much humanity has to lose when they do. The future is shaped by the lessons we choose to remember. This is History Files, where the past is never truly silent.